This webinar today will be focused on enhancing the farmed landscape and talking about the opportunities that there are for farm businesses for woodland creation. Introducing our speakers, so we have Josh joining us, Forestry Commission Land Use Advisor, as well as Tim Dafford, National Trust Countryside Manager for Killerton Estate, and Richard Hellier, our Landscape and Woodland Design Advisor at Forestry Commission. And running through the agenda, we've got a quick introduction from Josh, and then we'll have a detailed example from the Killerton Estate. Tim will talk through working with the tenants, woodland creation planning grant, and then we'll move through to talk about responding to the landscape context. Richard will go through applying woodland design principles, undertaking the woodland design process, and then we'll get to questions. So handing over to Josh.
Thank you. And yeah, I appreciate that, Becca. Yeah, so I'm just going to introduce landscape and also the UK Forestry standard, or UKFS generally people call it, just in case people aren't aware of what that even is. Sometimes we get that. So the UK Forestry Standard is a document, but it's also a benchmark for sustainable woodland management across the UK. It sets out kind of the legal and best practice requirements of forestry, and it sort of ensures a standard, as it suggests, to the forestry industry that we work in. What I wanted to sort of draw out of that is what does within the UKFS landscape within it. So the quote, as you can see, is it suggests it's an area as perceived by the people whose character is the result of the action and interaction of natural and/or human factors. So obviously, kind of a lot of kind of document speak there, but it's fundamentally a reflection of the sort of world around you and how you interpret it. So as we move on to the next slide. So the key aspects of landscape within UKFS is it's focusing on integration with your surroundings. So how does that work within the landscape? How does it complement that situation, which is going to be touched on with our speakers later? The visual impact in the design. So how do you enhance your scenic quality? The cultural and historical significances. What has been there before and how can we bring that within to that design? Ecosystem function, so that is biodiversity, supporting biodiversity and enhancing all the things that come with that, from water to soil, and the public perception and how do people use that space. So yeah, very whistle stop, and I didn't want to rest on it too much because you're going to have some real good insights into that later. But I'm going to pass on now to Tim.
So yeah, thanks, Josh. That's great. So hi everybody. I'm Tim Dafford. I'm the countryside manager for the National Trust estate called Killerton, which is just outside Exeter. And I'm going to go through some examples of what we've been delivering here over the last 4 years, and then talk about two specific case studies on different farms where we've developed woody habitats, new woodland, wood pasture. So I'm going to go through those shortly. So if I just give you a bit of context to Killerton. So this is our this map shows the whole estate, but also it shows you our principles of how we're going to expand and connect habitats across Killerton. So this is kind of indicative, and this is what we work with our tenant farmers to say, where we've got woodland, we want to expand it. Where we've got floodplains, how do we restore those? How do we support farm businesses with grazing and arable production? So it's 10 square miles, about the same size as Exeter in size. We have 12 farms, which we're working. All their businesses are thriving, but we're there to support them. We've also got a massive growing population around Exeter, so potentially 50,000 new homes in the next 25 years going to be built around the estate. So we're important, like how do we connect people to this landscape? So, and the final thing about Killerton is we're part of round 1 of landscape recovery, which is the DEFRA's, the top tier of elms through DEFRA. So we're just submitted that. So that's something that we'll look at, a 20-year scheme for our tenant farmers here at Killerton. But I wanted to just go through what we've achieved over the last 4 years, so you can see the scale of change at Killerton. So these are just some of the incredible kind of feats, I guess, from the ranger team and our tenants, what we've delivered over the last 4 years. So you can see huge amounts of new habitats, whether it's woodlands, orchards, floodplains, new hedges, new wood pasture blocks. We've restored lots of meadows as well on the estate. So we've already had a track record over the last 4 years of how to put woody habitats back into the estate. So I'm just going to show you quickly some photographs of some of the areas that we've worked on, just to give you some kind of real live examples of different approaches that we've done. So we're going to start off with wood pasture. So this is on one of our farms, in-hand farms. So National Trust managed this farm called Ashcliffe Farm. And this is where we put in 0.1 hectare blocks of trees within the grazed pasture. And then the idea is that after 10, 15 years, once those trees have established, those fences will get removed and the cattle will then graze it as a complete wood pasture grazing parcel. But in the immediate first 10, 15 years, we have to protect it from stock. You can also see in the background of this photograph some individual trees. So within the pasture, we've also got kind of parkland trees, which are looking more like individual kind of standalone trees outside woodland, we call them. Kind of the veteran trees of the future, really, within the parkland. I'm just showing you a photograph, like an aerial photograph of that. That's looking down on this grazed pasture. So it's an organic farm. And you can see these 0.1 hectare blocks. Approximately 250 trees in each block, and that's part of what it looks like if you're on the ground. And you can see we've got established woodland in the background, Ashcliffe Forest, and then this is a wood pasture field which separates the woodland from the floodplain. So it's this kind of connection in the landscape to try and put more woody features in there. The next area I wanted to show you is obviously trees outside woodland. What a lot of people would think of like standards in hedgerows or parkland trees, and these are hugely valuable for wildlife. And we've been working with our tenants to put more into our hedgerows, but also to protect some of our veterans from either impact of stock or impact of people going and sitting underneath these trees and causing compaction to the roots. So looking after individual trees is as important as putting in new woodland as well within the landscape. So we've been protecting those veteran trees or parkland trees. So the other areas we've been doing is looking at new woodland. So this is a new woodland at Burrowton, where there's a huge amount of open space in here. So we're looking at 29% open space, and our grazier cuts the open space for hay, and then the rest of the field is going through to woodland creation. So there's still an element of producing a grass product in the open space, but then we've got the woodland being planted here. Interestingly, these are cardboard tubes, which we've been trialing different non-plastic varieties, but the cardboard tubes were a bit of a failure, so they've been replaced. They don't last long enough to actually establish the trees. So, and the next picture is one of our woodlands from this winter. Again, these are different design, but also using different products. So we've got some starch spirals, we've got some non-plastic tubes in there and some plastic. So we've gone for 50% plastic, 50% biodegradable, because we know plastic is very reliable and it can be recycled, but we want to trial and test some of these non-plastic products. The next one is agroforestry. So how can we put in more kind of productive woodland habitats into the landscape? So again, we've got an orchard below this site, and then we've got a woodland to the right of this site, and this is another connecting habitat where our grazier grazes his cows through this new agroforestry site. It's a mixture of fruit and nut species, and yeah, grazed between Easter and October. Hedges, another big thing for us on the estate. We've lost about 45 kilometres of hedgerows in the last 100 years, and we've been tasked with trying to put back 25 kilometres in the next 10 years. So we've currently done 15 kilometres, and these are just two examples of hedgerows that we're using sometimes to separate farms, sometimes to create new connectivity in the landscape. The picture on the right is a super hedge, so it's double lined hedge with area in the middle to scrub up. This gets fenced off from cattle or from this, particularly this site is going to arable rotation on the outside of the hedge. But yeah, how do we put these kind of hedgerows back in is another opportunity for us, as well as the woodland options. So I want to just go focus in now on two of the case studies for our property. The first one is Ashcliffe Farm, which was done under the English Woodland Creation offer. And then the second example is one of our community forest sites, which is a 64 hectare new woodland wood pasture offer. So I'm just going to go through those and show you some of the designs, also show you some of the before and after shots, aerial shots showing you the impact on the landscape. Yeah, and then we'll have opportunities at the end to ask questions about both these schemes, but I'm going to start off with Ashcliffe Farm. So this is the design, shows you 29% open space in here. It's connecting the floodplain on the bottom of your map here. So the River Clyst runs through here. We've got Ashcliffe Forest in the top left. And this is a connection kind of buffering, expanding our woodland from the west and going down towards the floodplain. Interestingly, you can see through this design that we've also kept a large area of wood pasture where our ecological surveys found a lot of species-rich grassland down through here. So the design of the woodland has avoided planting anything on this species-rich grassland. So the design has to match what we're seeing on the ground as well. So you can see there's loads of open space, loads of rides, there's scrubby edges. So you've got the core kind of woodland species in this green color, and then you've got kind of shrubby areas around the edges of the woodland design. Now, what I'm going to show you now is a photograph before this picture, kind of looking from the southwest, looking in an easterly direction. So I'll just show you that photo now. So that's looking at that design. If I flick back, so we're going up, yeah, in a kind of northeasterly direction on this map. And these are the two fields here. So this shows you what it looked like before we started planting. And then we've used some software to add in the trees so you can see the impact on the landscape. And we're very much trying to match the landscape that is at the estate. So it's a farm wooded estate, and the landscape character is of such that it says, you know, we're looking for small pockets of woodlands within the landscape. And that's what we're trying to replicate here with this design. In total, we put in 11,000 trees about a year ago. Fencing contractors were brought in to do it, but most of the planting contract or the planting of the trees was done by community groups for this specific project. So if I'll flick through to show you what we think the impact will be by the end of the century. So it can show you there the open spaces, the parkland kind of hedgerow standards that have grown up, and then the woodland itself. So you can see that it's matching that kind of farm wooded valley, small woodlands in the landscape. You can see an orchard on the left there that was planted 4 years ago, which was also kind of complements that design. But importantly, the floodplain is still grazed by our tenant, and then they will also be managing the wood pasture blocks within the just outside the woodland design. So Ashcliffe Copse was done about a year ago under English Woodland Creation offer, and this was the income that or associated costs and income that came with that project. So this has all been rounded up for approximately, so it's a 6.5 hectare scheme, and this was the capital costs, and you can see there the additional contributions that was attracted by that design. And then you can see the maintenance fund that we drew down to help look after it. So interestingly, when we have working with our tenants, we can offer them the opportunity to do the fencing contract if they want to take on the planting contract or the maintenance contract. These are things that we're always working with our tenants to see if they'd like to take that option on when these woodland schemes go ahead. So you can see it's a significant amount of money, but it also allows ongoing maintenance to make sure that we do establish those woodlands. So that's Ashcliff's Copse. And now I'm going to go move on to Column John Farm. And this is a really interesting map that shows you the landscape character of the Killerton estate. And we're looking at a design up through here, which is Column John design here, but you can see it's in a landscape character called estate wooded farmland, which is this kind of mauve blue color. And that means that we're trying to match that in our design, so making sure that it complements the existing character of the estate. But this map has too much detail in there for you to look at, but it just shows you the different aspects of the estate and what the characters are, so that we try and match any woodland creation to those designs. So that's the starting point, really. How do we match our work to the existing landscape? And interestingly, Josh was mentioning about the historic landscape and the cultural aspects of it. This is an interesting map of the geophysical surveys of the fields at Column John, where we were intending on planting. And you can see all these different features through here. So there's a settlement here. There were some ring ditches, burial mounds down through here. So working with our archaeologists, we very much wanted to make sure the design complemented the features that we're finding underground. So you've got the kind of landscape thread, then you've got the heritage thread. And this geophysical survey helped us make sure our open space matched where we had archaeological features. And you can see in the northern field here a causeway, which originally we were going to plant on, but when we found this through the geophys surveys, we decided to take the fencing and the trees off this design. So this is really important because it's a really historic estate with lots of kind of heritage features on the records. So we wanted to make sure that we're also thinking carefully about the heritage. How do we promote it? How do we talk about it? And how do we save it and keep it in these open spaces? So yeah, so heritage important. And the other thing really important here is working with our tenant at Column John. So we had quite a blank map here of the wood pasture. You can see the blue area here with the dotted trees within it. So that was where we knew we wanted to put wood pasture habitat. So potentially up to 50% trees. But we wanted to make sure it matched the needs of our tenant. And things like that our tenant was coming up with is he wanted to have space without dogs, without the public. So he could have cows and calves in the landscape and know that he's not going to have to interact with dogs. Killerton's got over 400,000 visitors. A lot of them bring dogs. So we needed to make sure there was a space for public free, really, so he could manage his bulls or his cows with calves without that risk. But also he wanted some space to cut for hay, for winter fodder. And also we wanted to make sure we got enough trees in the landscape. So there's this kind of toing and froing about the design and co-designing it with our tenant. But this map shows you the blank bit of the wood pasture blocks that he was going to be managing for us. So having spoken to our tenant about the needs of his Highland cows, so his organic beef herd, and what that design would look like, we came up with a much more revised design for the wood pasture. So if I can point out a few things here. So we've got the causeway is kept clear of any fencing. These were really important archaeological fields here, which we've kept clear mostly of trees so that our tenant can cut this for hay, and can also cut these fields closest to the farm for hay. And then we agreed that this bluish colour field here would have far more densities of trees in it, and we wouldn't be expecting our tenant to cut this for hay. So this was just going to be pasture. So you can see we found that sweet spot between getting trees in the landscape, matching our existing woodland here. So this is Daneswood, the existing woodland. So we buffered and expanded it. We've created public access that outside the wood pasture, so the public don't go into it. So it connects two important routes through here, and then the public can enjoy the woodland, but they're not allowed or not welcome in the wood pasture block at the moment because of the farm needs of the farm business. And you can also see these pink patches within the design. That's because the Ackland family that gifted the estate, on lots of the high points around the estate, they've got like Wellingtonias and cedars. So we're trying to replicate that landscape feature of kind of having really important trees on some of the higher ground. So yes, that's the final design. I've been taking into account landscape, the ecological needs, the farmers' needs, and our archaeological input. So you can see it's been quite a process to get that that design to that point. So again, showing you some photos of before and afters. Now, if I go back to this map, this is this photograph comes from the northwest looking southwest. So we're looking this direction across the design. So yeah, so you can see this is the field here, and then the woodland in the distance. So this is what it would look like before we began, and then this is what we hope for it to look like by the end of the century. So again, if I flick back, so you can see we're trying to it feels like it's softening the landscape, filling in the gaps. You can see those woodlands expanding. So if I flick that back on, and you can see the open space for grazing within there from the farm, and there's a wood pasture on the other side of this road. Here's a road that comes through. And again, if we go back to quickly just go back to the design, the idea is that in 10, 15 years time, these fences, very simple barbed wire fences, would come out, and then this woodland, potentially 30, 40% woodland cover, would become part of that grazed landscape for the Highland cows. So yeah, so it's I hope that kind of indicates, it shows you the change that we're looking to make and how it matches the landscape, and it's not kind of wall-to-wall trees, yeah, within that view. Okay, so lessons learned. Really important to I guess that all those examples just show you that we're trying to get trees into the landscape at Killerton, but in lots of different ways, and those different approaches really match the needs of our tenants, the needs of our connection for habitats, but we have to have lots of different approaches to make sure that we can get the trees in, hold back the water, store the carbon, create new nature-rich habitats. But it's got to be done in conjunction with our tenants. So, for instance, our hedgerows, very much the last few years, our hedgerow creation has been all generated. The idea has been generated by a tenant. So they said, oh, I'd like to split that pasture in two. Could we put a hedge in the middle of that field? So a lot of those ideas are either linked to the historic record of hedgerows, but sometimes, especially the last few years, it's the tenants coming up with the ideas and saying, we'd really like a hedge there. We'll pay for the fencing and pay for hedgerows to go in. They get a smaller pasture so they can do rotations better with their cattle. So yeah, so we're having lots of different approaches, I guess, and that's the important thing. Make sure we've got different ways to get trees into the landscape that work with our farm businesses. And then just a real overview of how it complements things. We talked about matching the landscape character, making sure that we're looking at the kind of historic features and the cultural aspects of the estate. So the geophysical surveys or the historic record that the local authority will hold all helps with that. And making sure that we are connecting, buffering our existing woodlands. So we're trying to, where we can, buffer and expand our woodlands and connect them. That's our starting point with this habitat creation. And then that important thing about working with our farmers, what's going to work for them? How do we get these new habitats in that matches their business? It works with them. We're not going to say blanket trees everywhere or the public are allowed everywhere. We very much need to work and co-design these habitats so they work for our tenants. And then the final thing I wanted to just say is that when we're working on these schemes, for instance, that Column John scheme, if our tenant is managing the wood pasture habitat, then the income that's related to that area is shared with the tenant. And interestingly, at Column John, our tenant is doing all the track works for the woodland, so they're contracting out, the contract goes to them for the track works. but they also get that payment for wood pasture management. So it's a shared scheme, but it's also we're sharing the income with our tenants to make it happen, because without their resilient business, we're not going to be able to carry on this great work. So we have to make sure that we're kind of supporting their farm businesses to diversify and have these trees in the landscape, but we need to make sure that we also reward them or incentivize them with sharing the income from some of these schemes. Some of our tenants might go into becoming contractors to look after the trees. There's a huge amount of work in the first 3 or 4 years to look after the trees. The Column John scheme is about 40,000 trees that went in this winter. That's a lot of weeding, spraying, mulching, whatever your requirements are for your woodland, because if you don't get that right in the first 4 years, then you'll be struggling and having to replace a lot of the trees. But yeah, just hopefully that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what we've been doing at Killerton, and those 2 key case studies of what we've been doing. So I look forward to answering any of your questions towards the end. Thanks a lot.
Yes, so yeah, what I wanted to sort of suggest is sort of reiterating a lot of what Tim said just then, is that to ensure that you know, planning is such an essential part to developing appropriate woodland that reflects your kind of needs and requirements within your landscape, whether that be farming, whether that be ecological or biodiversity benefits, whether that be carbon, you know, or timber requirements. So it's all reflected on what your interests are. So going into the sort of specifics, and you may have already seen some of this information on our funding webinar, quick plug, that you can go and find more details on our grants, as we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago. But this is just because with a landscape context. The land must be within England. Much of these kind of details, you can be joint multi-landowner applications. So if you want to incorporate other areas or other land holdings, you can bring them in. You do not need to own the land, but obviously collaborating with the ownership of that land is essential. It's a range of woodlands, as I've said. What your requirements are will reflect the kind of design feature of it. So that, you know, that is reflecting, and it's so case by case that we see such different woodland creation and woodland designs within it. There we go again, the UKFS, it has to be compliant. We need to make sure that that is constantly a thread within all grants, that we always have UKFS compliancy. And yes, the total funding is capped at £30,500. I'm going to go into that into the next couple of slides, but there's a minimum of 5 hectares, but there is no maximum. Obviously, you know, once you're sort of developing those larger estates, you're going to be really requiring design. But even those, I think it's understated how much it is required for those smaller woodlands. So just moving on. And these are the stages. It's sort of broken down into 2 stages with, you know, additionalities of supplementary such as surveys. But yeah, the sort of stage 1 is a desk-based sort of research, identifying some of those things Tim said, trying to bring up those kind of areas where we need to be looking at historical. So and just sort of bringing all the information to the table so that can actually be placed within this sort of design concept. And then stage 2 is that development of the design. So just going over here, this stage 1 is just, yeah, the opportunities and constraints, and looking at what we want to do with it, speaking to you, and bringing in potential surveys and vegetation that are within it. The next stage is where we kind of get into the kind of some of the information and some of the beautiful designs that you saw that Tim also had. Is what we want to do is create that kind of concept, a thing that can give you that that visualization of what your woodland's going to be, and to tweak it. Like, again, not to keep bringing in Tim's, but the example's so good of that it's not just a static thing. It's you take that initial view and then you work on it and you develop it further. So yeah, ensuring that it's a continuously live thing that you work on and try and refine through the process. And then you come down to having that final woodland creation design plan, which you can then take to implement either through UCO and you know, use that funding. And then yeah, these are a few of the examples. 1 minute. Sorry, these are a few of the examples that we've gone through of stage 2 maps. As you can see, there's zoning, interest, key points, sort of pinch points within it, and yeah, I think Richard is going to sort of touch upon a lot of this detail in much deeper, you know, deeper detail. But yeah, these are the steps that you want if you are thinking about coming into the Woodland Creation Planning Grant, is submit your application form with a map boundary, a sort of SBI, if you have that detail, and then developing that sort of stage 1. A lot of this will be sort of handheld through the process, through the Forestry Commission, but it does require work for you to take some time to do this, and then we'll develop that into stage 2. But yeah, there we go. Richard, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so I'm one of 2 landscape woodland design advisors for England. So I do the southern part of the country, and I've got a colleague that works in the north. We work in the policy advice team, and part of my role is to review cases and give advice. So I do see a lot of examples across the country, most of which, of course, are on farmland. We've already obviously talked about what is landscape. A bit, you know, essentially it covers most things. It's the action and interaction between natural and human processes. So it would go right to the middle of cities, to the uplands and everything in between. And the other key message, a lot of people think landscape is primarily a visual matter, but it's not at all. It's very much about how landscapes function. And of course, we've heard a lot about that in Tim's talk, about getting it right with the agricultural aspects of a place, you know, the nature, how people view it and experience it, dog walking and that kind of thing. So it's very much about the whole, it's the integrated aspects of a place. And the other thing I'd like to emphasize is landscape isn't just about protected landscapes, or our UKFS requirements don't just apply to the really top of the range sensitive landscapes. It's all landscape matters is something that's our government have signed up to in the European Landscape Convention. So obviously a lot of us enjoy and use landscapes that are, you know, not in a protected situation at all. So it's important throughout. So good woodland design, you know, it's a bit of a catch-all, but what it really means is taking an integrated approach. So all our sites and all our objectives, they're often very complicated. You know, it's not generally not just one thing. And so we don't work in silos. We work more thinking about the big picture, starting at the larger scale and working into detail. So these are just some of the factors that relate and you know, should be considered in any scheme. And we have a toolkit that I'm just going to run through in this presentation to say a bit more. You know, it doesn't have to be an overcomplicated approach, and the way it's used depends on the scale and the sensitivity of your project. So obviously Tim's was a large scale scheme in a very sensitive landscape, but it can be, you know, a lot more straightforward. So don't be intimidated, I suppose, is the message. But good design practice is important in meeting UKFS compliance. So there's a lot of guidance we have to make it a smooth process. It contributes to the EIA process. But the other key thing is by producing some of these graphics and good illustrations, it does really help you smooth the way with all those stakeholders, you know, local communities, all those people, the farmers, tenant farmers, all those people that are particularly interested in what the landscape change entails. And you know, this is really encompassed in the woodland design process, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that and show you some examples. But essentially, it's taking account of your landscape context, so really understanding how your site and its setting works and its character and how it's evolved over time, how people use it. We have a set of 7 design principles that I'm going to talk about a bit more. And then the other key thing is that, you know, in order to communicate, you're working out how you get from A to B. Visual material is really important, and it's more than just plans, generally speaking. At the higher level, I don't know how many people are aware, but England's divided into 159 national character area profiles. These have been produced by Natural England, and they're well illustrated and a really good guide to get the sort of big picture understanding of where your site is and where your farm's located, and what the defining characteristics of that site are, because, you know, more than likely that they're going to be relevant in how you shape your woodland design. At a more local level, local authorities do produce landscape character assessments, so they're worth looking at, sort of a more finer grain. And then in the protected landscapes, there's management plans, and they're worth looking at in terms of, particularly the more recently produced ones, in terms of woodland targets and the general character of a protected landscape. But what our real toolkit is really about this landscape character appraisal. So it's taking the big picture on board, but it's looking at your site and the immediate setting of your site. So we have a document that I'm going to flag up shortly. It's bespoke for woodland creation, and as I say, visual material is a very efficient way of communicating how you get from A to B, as I've said. So that includes plans, but not just plans, also annotated photographs and, where appropriate, perspectives. So there's really 2 stages we're looking at the landscape context. There's the setting, analysing the setting. And it isn't just really descriptive, it's really understanding how elements within the setting might influence the shape of your woodland design. And it's not just trees. These are what's been highlighted here is largely the treescape or the woodlands. So, you know, you've got this is Exmoor, actually, a very distinctive protected landscape. And in the green ring, you've got, open grown trees on a ridge. They're very much a prominent feature. And, you know, very much a distinctive characteristic of Exmoor. As is in the blue ring, you've got scrubby hawthorn and other shrubs colonising the steeper slopes that are also grazed, but they give quite a distinctive character, but also have their own significance for biodiversity. And in the woodland at the bottom there, in the red ring, you've got a lot of broadleaf riparian woodland. You've got some pre-UKFS conifer plantations there, but done in quite obviously a very prominent place in a very regular way. So that's not the way we like woodland to be undertaken these days, but it's just a lot more of a case of integrating it. And then in the orangey ring there, you've got another characteristic of this place, a lot of beech hedges that create the enclosure around pasture, and that goes, you know, particularly prominent below the moorland line, but across the lower slopes. This is more looking at landscape context in your site. So this is very close to the previous photograph. Again, you've got very prominent beech and oak trees on an open ridge, so they can be seen from quite a distance. So they're a feature that needs to be considered, particularly from the point of view of you wouldn't want to plant closed canopy woodland around those, so they lose their characteristics and ultimately they become lost within a closed canopy woodland. So that's something to mark on your site appraisal plan, these features. But also in the slight foreground, you can see there's quite diverse scrubby, quite hedges and hedgerows that haven't been over managed, and they're quite extensive in this case. So they are edge is a very important constituency of woodland. You've got, if you like, you've got ready-made edge, so you would put a ring around that area to feed into an edge habitat corridor that really adds a lot more diversity to your woodland. But always bear in mind of the amount of light and space scrub in particular and woodland edge needs. So I mentioned woodland design principles. This is a diagram, hopefully, well, it's covering the 7 design principles, and hopefully it's making it quite clear to grasp. Starting at the top, the 2 that really need to be considered at the very beginning is the spirit of place, which effectively means what makes the location, the setting distinctive. So I've already highlighted some things that make Exmoor a distinctive place, some of those sort of treescape and woodland elements that are typical of that place. But it would also include viewpoints, historic environment features, biodiversity habitats. It's normally a combination of a whole range of features and characteristics that make a place distinctive and special, and you need to really take those on board. Unity is very aligned to that. It's about how you fit a new woodland comfortably within your setting and within your site. So again, following on from what I was saying about mapping those features within your site that are important and distinctive, that shows how you can dovetail new woodland planting within that as a framework. Landform and pattern of enclosures, particularly in the southwest of England, are always key aspects of any woodland design because sites are often very prominent. You've got a lot of interesting landform, and patterns of enclosure, another really distinctive characteristic made more visible because of the landform. So when you're working on plans, having the contour lines so you understand how the woodland responds to the topography, and then consider the pattern of enclosure. I identified an area of sort of scrubby hedge that actually is effectively could be integrated with a ready-made piece of woodland edge, for example, whereas there are other much tighter hedges. The last thing you really want to do is to fit, have a buffer of a certain distance and then plonk in compartments within that. So there's quite a lot of creativity involved in woodland design and how you can make your particular woodland distinctive, and particular to your place and your objectives. And then the final 3 are shape, scale, and diversity. So these are the factors that always are relevant wherever you are. Scale in particular, you need to think about how trees grow and the shading effects of if you've got open ground or edge or any other features. You need to just think about design not from the day you're doing it, but how it changes over time. So finally, this is the woodland design process. So this may look slightly complicated, but actually it's very straightforward recording and illustration of your design journey. So at the start, of course, everyone will have a vision and an idea of what they want to achieve and where their woodland's going to go into their land. And so people are bound to have these initial sketchy working proposals with a vision and a set of objectives. So that's good. But then you almost need to walk onto your site and start thinking in quite objective terms, almost forgetting the woodland, but evaluating and mapping those features like I've been talking about that make the place distinctive, have benefits for sense of place, for wildlife, landmarks for for people on public rights of way. They could be really important as viewpoints. So you want to maintain an open vista, for example. So it's really mapping and illustrating with photographs as appropriate what makes your place unique and special. And often, that helps the site almost design itself, because it identifies the compartments where, higher canopy woodland's going to fit and really enhance that woodland. And you're keeping those qualities, those special qualities, give them plenty of space and ideally connect them. So you still got that functionality, particularly amongst habitats, for example. And the same applies to the site. You go into more detail, looking at your place and ideally zoning it. Zoning it helps a lot, particularly on the larger sites. So all I mean by zoning it, well, I'll illustrate that actually. And then ultimately that comes to design concepts, where you can still in quite a sketchy form, but you can come up with sometimes a couple of options of what you're going to do in different parts of your landholding. This is the document that explains the landscape context analysis process more clearly. As I say, it's really about producing good annotated plans, photos and perspectives. And we do, myself and my colleague regularly do bespoke training and upskilling sessions, either on webinar or face-to-face sessions. Just to emphasize the point that woodland design is really blending what's there already with your vision and your objectives in a way that fits, like a jigsaw, like a glove, and you don't lose any of the real special qualities, but you also meet your woodland creation objectives. This is a landscape context sketch that was based on a photograph. It's handwritten, but it's picking up all those aspects in the setting that need to be considered and how the UKFS says you need to deal with it, such as study the landscape character at a local level, identifying the key characteristics. So I've been talking about that. More in a more sophisticated way on a larger site. This is from an EA LiDAR plan. It's a site near Yeovil in the southwest, where there was a real, the site was on the edge of two different character areas, where you had flat farmland and then you had a sandstone ridge that was more grazed. So woodland is a really good blend between the two. And then you see, you've got annotation on there that just captures those key characteristics that would influence your design. And then just to give you a feel of the simplicity of a site appraisal plan and zoning, how in this case the site wasn't just one arable field. It was on that transition between more intensive farming and more open grazed, almost upland sandstone ridge. But there was a lot going on there. There was spring lines, there was areas of species-rich grassland with open grown oak trees. There was an area that was an arable field, two arable fields. There was an existing piece of natural woodland following a watercourse. And then there was a sort of transition area with some gorse that was, just on the edge of these character areas. So by looking at the big picture and identifying some of these, then that helps you fit different sorts of woodland into that framework. So where the spring line is, it's permanently wet, there's rush pasture, alder and willow immediately spring to mind as a good woodland option. Whereas where you've got the more, you've got the wide open oak trees that are still very healthy, producing lots of oak trees, there's options for natural colonisation. Where you've got an arable field, you know, it's maybe a lot more suitable for high canopy woodland, you know, influenced by the other woodlands in the area or kind. So the concept would relate very directly to that site appraisal zoning exercise. So, you know, you can fit in that, it'll all combine to be one woodland, but it'll have all this diversity within it and all these different slight characters, which is it's a really good example of how you integrate a new woodland into play, so it enhances and reinforces that landscape character. And then you can zoom in and start giving a lot more detail. You can talk about the species, and these will, as well as recording your design process, your design journey, if you like, these are also fantastically useful for consulting with all those that are interested. You know, I'd normally have a lot more annotation on these drawings, but in the simple form, hopefully they're also very useful to talk at and explain. And then the real important thing is where you've got landform and you've got viewpoints, or sometimes if you can use drones like Tim's schemes show, you know, you can start adding what the character of the woodland or what the landscape change is going to look like. And this is normally the thing that most people have an interest in, you know, whether it's a protected landscape, whether it's local walkers, whether it's local communities, you know, they're generally going to be very positive about tree planting, but they want to see that it's well considered and well designed. We've got an advice document coming out quite soon about how you can integrate edge or create edge within new woodlands. So this cross section is just showing where there was a very good network of blackthorn hedges that were really very valuable for birds and wildlife and insects, and how it's really important, as I said earlier, to set your forest scale trees well back, particularly on the south face, on the south edge of that, so that you don't shade out your hedge in 10 years or so, you know. And if it's, in this case, it was along a public bridleway, so that already gives you a bit of extra space. And then in order to integrate it into that landscape, it makes sense as well to have blackthorn and scrub, a good edge on the other side of that track, you know. And that's all about understanding and considering the dimensions. Final slide, just some of the design takeaways. So please utilize your woodland design process, because it's not only does it help you come up with a design, but it explains to ourselves and all those interested in how you made decisions and how you came up with your final design. Always really take the time to just think about your landscape context, your site and your setting, and what characteristics within that you might want to use in your new woodland design. The woodland design principles are very helpful as a checklist to think about when you're going through that process. Really be prepared to use visual material, but they don't have to be highly sophisticated. They just need to be appropriate to the scale and sensitivity of your scheme. And you know, as I said there, the design process is flexible. So it's a tool. So just think place, principles and process, and then you should be really on the right track, and hopefully that helps.
Thanks so much, Richard and Tim and Josh. Really appreciate that. Just to go through the next steps then, for those of you considering woodland creation, think about what's possible, have clear objectives for your woodland creation scheme. Always remember right tree in the right place, and then contact us to start your woodland creation journey. We've got our Southwest Woodland Creation mailbox there. We'll send around the link post-webinar along with the recording and links to some of the resources mentioned throughout, and get in touch with us. If you're advisors or agents and you're talking to people and you want some support, some extra training, again, please do get in touch with us. We are running training for advisors and agents starting from April, and we'll let you know dates and things close to the time. And just to say, we have our Southwest newsletter, which would be great if you could sign up to. That will give you the most up-to-date information on any grant changes and also any events, any training, any opportunities to engage with you as well. That goes on a monthly basis. So please do sign up to that. Again, we'll send you the links. And as mentioned at the top of the meeting, we have 2 more webinars coming up in the series. Productive Forestry on the 3rd of April, Agroforestry on the 10th of April. So please do sign up to those if you haven't already. And the links Millie has provided to the other recordings in the chat for you to have a look at. I will just ask if there's any questions before we sign off. There was just one I saw in the chat right at the beginning of the webinar for Tim around, I think, landscape recovery. So I don't know if, Tim, you wanted to just come off mute and answer Charlotte's question. Are there plans to fund work at Killerton through landscape recovery?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in our submission, we've put forward a pipeline of woodland creation sites that has being proposed by our tenants. And the idea is that existing schemes will get combined into landscape recovery, but it's potentially through that scheme that UCO or community forest could be like the funding option for the woodland aspects of the scheme. But it's so bespoke landscape recovery, it's probably hard to kind of answer it precisely until we get through the implementation stage. But yeah, we're looking at the woody habitats being funded either through the Forest Commission or through community forest. But it might be that the schemes themselves get wrapped up into landscape recovery funding. But we'd need the support and advice of the Forest Commission to deliver any of our woody habitats anyway. But it's not been decided just yet.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. It seems as though we've given everybody a lot of food for thought. No other questions coming through. I will just say that this isn't the last opportunity to ask us questions. And if you have got anything that you think of later that you particularly want to put to Richard or Tim, please do get in touch with us via our Southwest Woodland mailbox, and we will pass on those questions to Tim and to Richard. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thanks, Tim, Richard, Josh. Really appreciate your support with this, and hope everybody has a great rest of the week and speak soon. Bye.